You are nothing more than an overpaid mechanic, Dean, and it's about time everyone in this building realized it." Standing before a stunned crowd of 300 employees, CEO Vanessa Sinclair publicly terminated Dean Foster. To the onlookers, Dean was just a quiet, widowed father whose security badge labeled him as a low-level technical advisor. Dean didn't raise his voice or plead for his job. He simply packed his belongings, salvaged a crumpled, faded photograph of an old garage from a recycling bin, and stepped out into the freezing rain. Pulling out his phone, he dialed Ruth Bennett and delivered a chilling four-word directive: "Tear it all down." Vanessa smugly walked back to her office, entirely convinced she had just swatted away a minor annoyance and cleared the path for a massive $900 million corporate buyout. She was blissfully unaware that Dean's brief phone call had just triggered a meticulously crafted trap, 11 months in the making. The clock was ticking, and she had exactly 6 hours left before her stolen empire crumbled to dust. Who exactly is the man they just threw out into the rain? Before we dive into this ultimate masterclass of corporate revenge, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a tale of cold, calculated justice. Now, let's explore how one invisible man took back his entire legacy. For Dean Foster, the rhythm of life was dictated by the shape of dinosaur pancakes. Every single weekday morning, he stood in his modest kitchen on the outskirts of Detroit, carefully pouring batter while his 5-year-old son, Eli, enthusiastically demanded a T-Rex or a Stegosaurus. It had been 4 excruciating years since Dean's wife, Grace, lost a rapid and devastating battle with illness. In the hollow aftermath of her passing, Dean had deliberately shrunk his universe, restructuring every waking moment to ensure he dropped Eli at the school gates by 8 and was waiting on the porch by 3:15. To a stranger, this routine looked like the life of an ordinary, struggling single dad. Absolutely nothing about his quiet existence hinted at the reality. Dean Foster secretly owned 62% of Foster Precision Group, an elite aerospace and medical manufacturing giant worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The empire had been forged decades ago by his late father in a damp, rented garage. Yet in the sprawling modern facility, Dean masqueraded as a nameless contractor. He wore a faded canvas jacket, silently pacing the production floors, recalibrating heavy machinery, and blending seamlessly into the background. The newer staff members viewed him as an enigmatic ghost who arrived before dawn and vanished before the evening rush. They had no idea that during the darkest depths of his grief 4 years prior, Dean had voluntarily walked into a boardroom and handed the reins of his family's legacy to an outsider. That outsider was Vanessa Sinclair. She was a corporate shark, armed with a flawless resume, an aggressive knack for inflating profit margins, and a deeply rooted chip on her shoulder. Having watched her mother serve as an underpaid secretary to men who stole her ideas, Vanessa had vowed to never be the invisible worker bee. But over the years, her fierce ambition had mutated into toxic entitlement. Because she was the public face of Foster Precision, she genuinely began to believe the empire belonged to her. When Dean had stepped away, he executed a brilliant, silent legal maneuver. He locked his majority shares inside the impenetrable GE Foster Trust, specifically designed to safeguard his son Eli's future wealth, appointing himself as the sole, anonymous trustee. The board members who authorized this move assumed the grieving widower was retreating permanently. Over time, Vanessa methodically purged the old guard, replacing them with hand-picked executives who owed her their careers and had absolutely no memory of the company's true origins. Only one individual inside the glass-walled headquarters knew Dean's actual identity. Ruth Bennett, a razor-sharp veteran of the finance department, had been keeping the books since the days Dean's father was sweeping the shop floors himself. She respected Dean's disguise, possessing the rare patience to wait until the numbers eventually revealed the truth. The erasure of Dean's legacy began with subtle, disrespectful strokes. A cherished historical photograph, showing a youthful Dean standing alongside a dedicated welder named Tommy Reyes in their original workshop, mysteriously vanished from the corporate lobby, only to be found face down in a basement archive box. Shortly after, the company's renowned trade apprenticeship program, originally named in honor of Dean's father, was rebranded with Vanessa's surname. Dean swallowed the disrespect, telling himself that a plaque and a picture were meaningless compared to his son's peace of mind. He refused to let his ego drag him into a petty turf war. However, his tolerance evaporated during a high-stakes quarterly review. Vanessa proudly proposed shifting their manufacturing to a new titanium supplier, boasting about an 18% cost reduction. Deep within the fine print, Dean spotted a lethal compromise. The cheaper metal failed to meet crucial durability standards required for internal surgical implants. Breaking his years of silence, Dean calmly interjected, explaining that a microscopic fracture in a defective implant could cost a patient their life. Vanessa didn't even blink. She offered a condescending smirk to the surrounding executives, casually reminding them that Dean was just a maintenance consultant who didn't understand the complex financial realities of modern business. The room chuckled nervously. Dean didn't argue. He simply opened his leather-bound notepad and etched a single ominous word: drift. That evening, Dean lingered in his cramped cubicle long after the lights dimmed, accessing restricted financial logs Vanessa had personally signed off on. A recurring anomaly caught his eye. A shadowy entity named Meridian Advisory Group was quietly siphoning $30,000 a month for consulting services that yielded zero reports and possessed no verifiable staff. Digging deeper through shell registrations, Dean traced the entities addressed directly to Vanessa's younger brother, Julian. Over $1 million had already vanished. This was no longer just an arrogant CEO erasing corporate history. This was a calculated parasite draining his son's inheritance. Dean immediately arranged a covert meeting with Ruth, instructing her to begin archiving every suspicious invoice, hidden contract, and manipulated profit margin on an external, untraceable drive. As their shadow investigation deepened, Vanessa accelerated her hostile takeover. She abruptly revoked Dean's security clearances to executive floors, forcing him to wear a humiliating visitor's pass. Long-standing employees who questioned her methods were ruthlessly demoted. Then, Ruth uncovered the smoking gun, a heavily encrypted digital dossier titled Project Crown. The file exposed a terrifying reality. Vanessa was secretly negotiating with a predatory investment firm named Holloway Capital. She intended to sell the controlling shares of the company, falsely presenting the GE Foster Trust as an abandoned, unmanaged asset that could be bullied into a dirt-cheap liquidation. To justify the artificially low sale price, she was deliberately tanking the company's internal metrics, signing unprofitable contracts, and preparing to lay off a massive chunk of the workforce to create the illusion of a financial crisis. Dean was trapped in a high-stakes chess match. Confronting her publicly without an airtight case would allow her to hit delete on the servers, framing him as a delusional, disgruntled mechanic. He chose the weapon of silence. By day, he continued to play the submissive handyman, wiping down gears and nodding politely. But under the cover of darkness, he and Ruth sat at her kitchen table, meticulously cross-referencing fraudulent invoices inside a heavy blue ledger. They tracked the fake warehouse leases, the bloated contracts, and the illegal wire transfers funneling directly into Julian's offshore accounts. The most sickening revelation came when Margaret, the estate lawyer managing the quiet administrative side of Dean's trust, received a courier package. It was a legally binding voting proxy, allegedly signed by Dean himself, authorizing Vanessa to execute the sale to Holloway Capital. Margaret spotted the discrepancies instantly: a lapsed notary seal, backdated ink, and a signature perfectly replicated from a forgotten rubber stamp left in the CEO's office safe years ago. Vanessa hadn't just bypassed him. She had committed blatant identity theft to rob his family. To secure irrefutable proof, Dean exploited Michigan's one-party consent law, planting a microscopic audio recorder inside his canvas jacket. At the company's lavish 15th anniversary gala, Vanessa cornered him near the bar. Dripping with arrogance, she told him he was nothing more than the brute muscle used for old promotional photos, while she was the visionary brain building an empire. Dean remained deadpan, absorbing the insults while the recorder captured every single damning syllable. The final piece of the puzzle dropped when Ruth intercepted a hidden termination schedule. 60 loyal employees were slated to be fired the exact moment the Holloway deal closed. Seeing the name of Tommy Reyes, the loyal welder who had helped build the very first machine, on that list shattered the last remnants of Dean's restraint. The corporate signing was officially scheduled for Friday evening at 5 o'clock. Margaret drafted the legal bombshells required to nullify the forged proxy, while Ruth finalized the digital backups of the Blue Ledger. They were ready to ambush the boardroom. But Vanessa was cunning. Late Wednesday night, corporate security flagged unusual data extraction tracing back to Ruth's terminal. Realizing a mutiny was brewing, Vanessa struck with lethal speed. On Thursday morning, she summoned the entire workforce and publicly humiliated Dean, terminating his contract and having armed guards march him off the premises. Moments later, Ruth was placed on immediate administrative leave, her electronics confiscated, and the finance wing locked down. Desperate to outrun any potential blowback, Vanessa contacted the Holloway investors and aggressively pushed the signing time up to 4:30 that afternoon. Standing on the rain-slicked pavement, locked out of his own empire, Dean made the call to Ruth to initiate the protocol. He had exactly 6 hours to reverse a $900 million catastrophe. At Fort Wentty, the atmosphere in the glass-walled boardroom was thick with anticipation. Vanessa sat triumphant at the head of the mahogany table, surrounded by expensive lawyers and the eager executives from Holloway Capital. Pens hovered over the final stacks of acquisition paperwork. The storm outside lashed against the panoramic windows, but inside, Vanessa felt untouchable. At Fort Wentty 6, the heavy oak doors swung open. Dean Foster strode into the room, his canvas jacket dripping with rainwater. He was flanked by Margaret carrying a briefcase of legal injunctions and Ruth holding the damning blue ledger. Vanessa sneered, instantly commanding her security detail to drag the disgruntled mechanic out. Instead, Margaret stepped forward, formally introducing herself as senior counsel for the G.E. Foster Trust, and ordered all negotiations to cease immediately. Slamming the forged proxy document onto the table, Margaret systematically dismantled it, highlighting the expired notary and the stolen signature stamp. Then she dropped the ultimate reality check on the room. Dean Foster wasn't a fired contractor. He was the founder, the sole trustee, and the rightful owner of 62% of Foster Precision Group. The man Vanessa had just tried to forcefully eject was the owner of the exact shares she was attempting to illegally sell. Panic rippled through the Holloway representatives. Vanessa, desperate and unhinged, lashed out, accusing Dean of abandoning his responsibilities and claiming the company only had value because of her visionary leadership. She dared them to prove she had done anything other than make tough executive choices. Without breaking eye contact, Ruth opened the blue ledger. She laid out the phantom warehouse deeds, the offshore money trails leading to Julian, the artificially deflated contracts, and the cruel termination list. As Vanessa shrieked about fabricated evidence, Dean signaled Margaret to play the audio file. The crystal-clear recording of Vanessa's voice echoed through the boardroom, arrogantly calling Dean nothing more than the muscle used for photographs. Dean leaned over the polished wood, his voice a lethal, icy whisper. "You were right about one thing, Vanessa. I am the muscle. And that muscle is the only thing that kept this foundation from collapsing, while you spent the last year secretly ripping out the bolts." The investors from Holloway Capital immediately packed their briefcases and formally withdrew their offer, fleeing the room to avoid federal conspiracy charges. Project Crown was dead. That very night, an emergency tribunal of the board reviewed the blue ledger and voted unanimously to terminate Vanessa Sinclair and her entire circle of conspirators for gross corporate fraud. Vanessa was escorted out of the building carrying a single cardboard box, walking past the historical photo of Dean and Tommy that had already been restored to its rightful place in the lobby. She stepped out into the pouring rain, her reputation permanently obliterated. Justice was swift and merciless. Julian turned state's evidence to save himself, while Vanessa faced severe federal charges, stripped of her wealth and permanently banned from holding corporate office. Foster Precision bounced back instantly. The 60 employees were saved, the cheap titanium contracts were shredded, and Ruth was rightfully promoted to chief financial officer. Tommy Reyes wept at his kitchen table when he received an official document legally recognizing him as a founding partner. Despite reclaiming his throne, Dean refused the full-time CEO title, choosing instead to serve as chairman. He knew the company required a leader, but his son required a father, and he refused to outsource the most important job of his life. Months later, on a tranquil Sunday afternoon, Dean and Eli sat at their kitchen table, meticulously gluing together a wooden birdhouse. Eli paused, holding a small nail, and asked if his dad had built the giant factory all by himself. Dean smiled warmly. He explained that his grandfather laid the bricks, his mother managed the brilliant ideas, Tommy handled the hot metal, and Ruth protected the math. Eli tilted his head, genuinely curious. "Then what did you do, Dad?" Dean placed a gentle hand over his son's, guiding the hammer down on the final nail. "My job," Dean replied softly, "was keeping it all safe." True power doesn't need to shout to be heard, and the most dangerous person in the room is often the one standing quietly in the background, keeping track of every single detail. If this masterclass in silent justice gave you chills, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and let us know in the comments which part of Dean's master plan was your favorite. Until next time, stay sharp and always respect the quiet ones.